Yes, and there we are again with a new episode of DanceGEMs. Today we are going to talk about pathways and what they are in dance. You could also say where we were, where we are, and where we are going. Sounds a little bit philosophical, but that's how Ton and I, Ton Greten, my friend and colleagues are, and let me see if he's there. Hello, Ton.
Hey, Sean, nice to see you.
Nice to see you
And
too.
again, we do a subject, it could be a song. We were,
Yeah,
where we are,
and where
yeah,
we are going. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah, pathways in dance. Yeah, pathways is not, of course, only in dance, but the word is maybe a little bit foreign for people in this context. And I think it's one of the fundamental things, but maybe I always say that on, but I think it's one of the fundamental things in your method, GEMS. I
yes,
think that is one of the fundamental things in GEMS pathways. So,
absolutely. If I
yeah,
would give a priority,
yeah.
oh, sorry,
No, go ahead,
yes,
go ahead.
Sean.
No, go
If I
ahead.
would give a priority to it,
Yeah, yeah,
then I would put proprioception on the first,
agree.
bending, stretching, rotating on the second, and all the lines of what we use during our dance, I would put on number 3. That, of course, all the subjects are very important, but the very basic is where you are going and
Yeah,
where we are at that moment
yeah.
and where we were. And this connects all the movements, how we can place them in space time.
Yeah. Yeah, as with a lot of things, of course, all these things are connected. You could say, okay, then we can talk about the number of body parts. That's where your book starts with. Yeah, all these things, we'll see that we cannot discuss one thing without also the other things, right? We cannot discuss the pathways in this case without mentioning proprioception, for instance. So,
Yes.
dear listeners, therefore, it's really good. And we're also happy, of course, always happy that you listen to the podcast. But we're doing pretty tough topics, and they actually makes more and more sense the more you actually listen to the podcast. So one podcast in itself could maybe be a little bit confusing. We try to be as clear as possible on one topic, and I wanted to say that, Tom. But it's also when I listen back, if you do 2 or 3, it already makes more sense. They think, oh yeah, now I get it, right? Because we come back on
Mhm.
proprioception almost every episode, and then you start to see the relationship between lines and, for instance, proprioception, or between focus and proprioception. Why have these things sometimes
Yeah,
even the mental
because
aspects? Yeah,
yeah, because it's a holistic approach. The one cannot out with the other. So you need both. And mostly we have also both. We will explain this later in the podcast. But first we start with the first, and this is our proprioception. We mentioned it many times already before. Proprio, your own property, your body, and deception or perception, what you have from that body. We made in the previous podcast the interoception and the exteroception, and in that we explain what the 5 senses could do as an external perceiver. And the lines or the pathways where we will speak now about in that proprioception, that body can move through space. And we call it the pathways and the floor pathway. And we have an air pathway. And actually, we have also a kinesphere. And all 3 have a relationship with each other. And we will explain all 3 words, what we meant with it. Maybe, Sean, you can explain the first one, the floor pathway,
yeah,
and,
yeah, definitely.
and maybe the air pathway, and then I
Yeah,
will take the
the kinesphere.
kinesphere.
This kinesphere. All right, that sounds like great. So floor pathway. If you look at other literature or you listen maybe to other lectures, then sometimes the word trace is used, right? In dance. So we're talking a lot about dance. So you could say floor pathway is, and that sounds really simple, but it is what you move on the floor and what kind of trace you leave behind, the trace that you are on or the pathway that we are on. Ton and I rather talk about pathway. Yeah, the pathway you are on. And imaginary, you could also think about what is the pathway you are going to take, like a GPS. It points out where the road that you are going to take. In choreography, for sure, we do that. So if you follow a choreography, then you know what pathway you take. But if you dance intuitively, even then there is already at least one little piece right before you take it where you're going. So you always have a place where you're coming from on the floor, where you go, where you are, and where you're going to. Very typically, we make that with our feet, but doesn't have to be. You walk on your hands, you shift on your bum, or even on your back, and you push yourself away with your feet. You could think of all if you roll over the floor, yeah. Then on purposely say, did you hear that, Ton? I said rolling, not turning. We roll over the floor. Then we make a pathway, right? Now, of course, when you move with your feet, there is only so far that you can do that without taking your body with you. So your body could make a different pathway in the air. Your arms could stay a little bit longer behind or go already a little bit more. If you look at me, go already be ahead of you. It could go in a different direction than you actually are moving with your feet. So therefore, every body part, we always talk about 10 in the gym, can have a different pathway, but typically they're not moving over the floor except your feet. So we call that the air pathways. Yeah, does that make sense?
Mm,
And to make a
yes.
movement and to initiate a pathway, you only need three things. You bend, rotate, or flex. And that defines the pathway, the movement. All right, Tom, was that summary
Yes.
enough? Was that short enough?
Yes. Perfect. Also, we always take our pathway to the future. And the past line where you came from, or the past pathway, when you walk on the beach and you see your footsteps, they are longer to see if you would see them as an external, and the present one is the most shorted one actually, because it's a journey where you go through that's very short. The future one, it's ahead of you
It's ahead.
in the future, and this is also could be a long way. And from past to present, I would say it's long in time, short, very short,
Mm,
because the present is already gone. We are already now present, and that what I said is already past, and we moving to the future in our pathway, on our floor pathway.
yeah,
And the air pathway, you
same thing.
mentioned that already, Sean?
Yep, I explained air pathway already. Let me put
Yeah.
some philosophy in here. There's a lot of talk about the power of now. I would almost say, if it comes to looking at things and hearing things, the now actually does not exist. You can only
Yes.
see things from the past because
Yeah.
it takes a little bit of time before Ton's image comes to me. It's very short, but it is already. So I can only look in the past. And that sounds really philosophical, but it's really nice to understand that your future pathways are always imaginary. Even if you have defined it already, you have to imagine it's not had happened yet. It might happen. A lot of things could happen in between. You don't know that. You can plan to have a future pathway. You cannot change your past pathway. And so for yourself, you might have an introspection of the now. That is an introspective feeling of the now. But you cannot. Some people say, "Oh, I look at the future of the universe." You cannot. You only see things that already has happened in the universe. There's no other way to look at the universe than things that has already happened. And that's an interesting way. And for movement, actually, when you get that from an introspective feeling, it's actually a very nice feeling. Well, at least I think, Don, it's very grounded feeling.
Yeah.
And
What also nice,
for that you need your kinosphere. You're getting
yeah,
there.
the Kinosphere. This I will tell later when I finish that one, that subject. Actually, see yourself as a painter who paint in the sky with your body parts, and there will come some art out of it in that pathway. And the beauty is, you as a person can decide to which place you want to move in that space. Two-dimensional on the floor, but three-dimensional in the pathway in the air. And actually, it's all three-dimensional, but also the fourth dimension is the time. You move always on a pathway through space and time. Otherwise, it's not possible.
Possible.
It's not possible. How you want to do that? That's
That's why I mentioned that philosophy. You don't have
yeah.
any notion of time. That what I just said about future and past is
It's
seems like
it's
that sounds
already
like
gone.
really. Then we sound like crazy
Yeah, and
people.
you know, no, and even also, even when you tell me the information, my brain, maybe somebody else, has immediately a click and said, "Oh yeah, clear, clear. I understand everything." But I need some time. Sometimes Sean says something very interesting or what I never heard before, and my brain has a duration necessary to progress all that information to my knowledge and make the neurone they are firing, make connection, and then suddenly I understand that. But then already Sean is already in the future and I'm still in the past.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That is even nowadays with the tools we have, we could measure it. You could actually film it, right? You when you look back and said, "Oh, now you're doing this," but actually, correct words. If you look at the film or recording, you can only talk in the past times. You can say, "Oh, this is what you're doing here." You should actually always say, "This is what you did here."
Yeah.
It cannot be. If you think about it, it's all mind-boggling. But if Ton starts to get into Kinosphere, it becomes really clear. For me, dancing became like so clear when that happened. My audience looks
Mhm.
always in what I already did. That makes me way more grounded in what I do. Fascinating thing that when I have not heard Ton, a lot of people when they wrote books like you did, I'm honored to have worked with it, to be so clear that none of the movements we can't make without the aspect of time in it, the fourth dimension. Herman Minkowski, as you always told, talked about it. Mr. Einstein took it over and developed his theories around it. But there is no movement possible to think about movement if there is no time. So
Yeah.
when people say also, like you said it very clearly, even from a thinking process, there's so much talk about the power of now. I feel like there is actually power in the past and in the future too, if you understand how it works. If
Mhm.
you understand how it works.
Correct, Sean. And the kinesphere, actually, kine mean it's movement,
Yeah.
kinetic, and sphere, it's like a ball around
Yeah.
you could say atmosphere, that's a space around you,
Yeah.
the sphere. It comes from atmosphere, and kine comes from kinesphere, from kinetic. And you move in a certain ball. And maybe you saw this sea or on the water, that it's a round ball where you can look through, where some people are in it, or mostly one. And the end of that ball, that's the end and the maximum reach what your body parts could do. And you can also move into yourself, and you make yourself so small as possible. The kinesphere would be also moving and make it's always around you. And you take this on the pathway with you, on the floor pathway, but also in the air pathway. So actually the kinesphere, when you move in an asymmetrically way, you have two arms high and you put one down, the kinesphere is then not round anymore, but it is asymmetric then. So it will not stay the whole time round like the ball on the water, but it will move with you. And
Yeah.
it moves also on the floor pathway, and it moves also in the air pathway. And Kinosphere actually, Rudolf Laban developed that, but actually his students developed that. Now I forgot the two names who really made the progress in that one. Maybe Sean can look for that one. But Rudolf Laban was actually inspired by Leonardo da Vinci, who take already the two people who stand behind in a circle and in a square, who he was inspired through Leonardo da Vinci. But Leonardo da Vinci was inspired by the Vitruvius man. Yes. And actually, they painted this in 2D, or at that time you had only 2D, flat, but actually it meant 3D. And I understood that from Walter Hermann, it's a German professor around 1575. He developed this, and after his reading his, not his book, but his article, then I understood everything. And Leonardo da Vinci was 100 years before, 1490, and the Vitruvius man was 80 before Christus. Yeah, Christ. Very interesting. And Rudolf Laban used this model and make their kinesphere from. And that's more impressive actually also because he said you can only move through that sphere on a floor pathway and in the air pathway, but in a kinesphere.
Yeah. What I
Uh,
think is interesting in this way. So if you, let's say you're standing on your feet, Tom, and you keep the feet where they are, you can already imagine a three-dimensional space around you that you can change even without changing the base of your support, right? So that
correct.
means that the whole kinesphere can already move in pathways, right?
Hmm.
And therefore, and I think that's where you took it very clear that you cannot find that in Laban, and because I'm not saying that I know everything about it, but I looked quite deeply in it. It doesn't make a difference between the floor pathway and the air pathway. So you could imagine that you could move, balancing and turning around like I do right now without changing my base. And that is actually the air pathway. I'm only changing my air pathway. If I take everything with me from to another place in this space that I'm in right now, I both changed my air pathway and my floor pathway.
Hmm.
Specifically in choreography, what we often see is that people only notate the floor pathway. That's what we often see. We see only if you look at books like the technique that we learn in ballroom, they only talk about floor pathway. They only talk how the
Only about
placement
four
is.
pathway, yes.
They might talk a little bit about rotation of the body, and the term that comes into play here is CBM, and we'll talk about these things later. But it's very limited. And people might say they start to not like us when we say that. It's just what it is. I'm not saying that it's a good or bad thing. I have no judgment over it. I think it's brilliant what those people wrote. It's very
Oh,
difficult
fantastic.
to. I have the utmost respect for people who try to define the floor pathway in that amount of precision that some of those people did it in the past. You can only
Hmm.
imagine what Tom just explained about the three-dimensional space to write a choreography where you express the air pathways of every body part that you have. That
Yeah.
you just have to think about that just for a small movement to describe everything that you do or want to do or what you did. That is just for
I-
the simplest movement is that. So trust me, I have the most respect for the people who did it on the floor pathway. Ton just
Yes,
brought
yes.
it a little step further.
Yeah,
And
10 body parts.
10 body parts. How can you move? bending, stretching. So it gives us already a language. I can already say, hey, on this piece, I am bending to the left my head. At least you have something because we know now what bending means, right? At least
Bending, stretching, rotation. Yeah.
it gives us a language. But even with that language tone, I definitely tried it with my choreographies. It's incredible to do that, to write about
Yes.
the kinosphere, how it changed. It's not just
No,
saying
I
rotating. Yeah.
yes, what I do, I will
Hmm.
come back with the pathways in the particular dance form in the later stage of the podcast. But I would start first maybe with one or two body parts,
Yeah.
how they move, and then when you not did a lot of exercise for your arms, then I would do maybe body and arms. So also two body parts, and then I would connect feet, hip, torso, and so the chest and the arms and the head maybe. But first I would practice them singular, how they move through space time on the pathway, on the floor
Hmm.
pathway, or in the air pathway. But I would start with the air pathway and later on with the floor pathway because you move through space in directions forward, backward, left, and also that is from a external sensory perceiver also what my left is their right if they look to me frontal to me, and they of course they see when I go forward, for them is it also forward. You make actually the space not smaller,
Hmm.
but the space you make more, you get more tension then to it. And what I wanted to say about the kinesphere, your lymph or your body parts has a maximum reach and a minimum reach. Even when you do all body parts at the same time minimum, the kinesphere would get smaller statically wise on the air pathway.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to say. And all the levels in between, because when you make yourself so small as possible, you go also so low as possible because you want to bend your feet also. And maybe you will your body fall on the floor and you get like a baby, you
Yeah.
make yourself so small as possible, then you are be horizontal on the floor and before
Mm.
your pathway would be vertical. So when your body is then falling, you make actually not one line, but you make a curve to the floor.
Yeah. You said something, Ton, and it triggered me a little bit in a positive way, by the way, about think about first your air pathway and then about your floor pathway. That's what you said, right? And this is an interesting thing if it comes to movement because we describe it often from the floor pathway, but it's possible, but it's very unnatural, and I'm using it now in the correct way, unnatural to move only through the floor pathway. Movement is
Mhm.
almost always initiated by an air pathway first. You always move your body weight first, which is an air pathway.
Yes, yes,
So,
or your feet, that you
well,
put your
but you
foot
cannot,
before the body.
yeah, but you still have to think about it that you have to be very conscious to keep your body still and only move your feet. And is it truly then literally that part where you touch the floor that move first? You will discover that in most movements, when you and I probably could do it, so literally conscious to do only that as a funny way of moving. But in most movements, whatever you do through the day, you will
Yes,
see that you move
correct.
first your weight towards someone. That's what you discover when you do a lot of proprioception exercises. And that gives us to think about how we think about movement when we constantly tell our students in a lot of dances, you do your foot to the left, you put your foot to the right. And you and I typically say, whatever you do, in most cases, you move your weight first off at least some of the body parts, if
Yes.
not all.
What I would practice first as a dancer is the floor pathway, how you use the floor. Then we have also, I put the floor in four squares. So when you put the floor in four squares, then my A would start left in front, and I would call them alpha, like in the universe. And in mathematics, I think they use that, or in physics, I don't know. But
It's actually
then
coming from the Greek alphabet, alpha.
from the Greek alphabet, yes.
Yeah.
Then I go to beta on the right side, on the front. So when I be in a theater, my left front for the audience would be the alpha. So when the dancer will be facial to the audience, that would be on the right side for him.
Yeah.
When I go against clockwise to the right front for the audience and for the dancer left side, then it's beta. When I go to clockwise to the back of the stage, and then it would on the right for the audience, left for the dancer, then it would be gamma. And when I would go to left to the stage on the back, in the front for the audience would be left, and for the dancer would be right, then it's delta. But to make it quite, say, in the easier language or in the common language, how we use it, we can call it also A, B, C, D. And then we have a two-dimensional four quadrants, four. And these four quadrants, I have take that from the universe, Sean. But the universe, actually, it's three-dimensional or four-dimensional. And the pretty of that one is when you put the air pathway, that's this four-dimensional, 3D for space, 4D for time, where you move through in this alpha, beta, gamma, delta, or A, B, C, D. In the ballet, they did it like that. I take against the clockwise because also I dance ballroom, and in the ballroom it's against the clock where you move. In ballet, they give it numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. For each line, pathway, they give a number. And in the ballroom, they call it to wall or to back to the wall. So they give it totally different names. And in America or in some other countries, they give it names like north, northeast, south, southeast. So they call it more for the wind directions. And I put it first in four quadrants, and then I gave the numbers, how I did it in my book. I gave it numbers to it. But I said no. I gave numbers and I gave frontal, middle, front, yeah, middle to the right, yeah, center, middle to the left, something like that. Yeah. And middle is then the middle of the floor, and center is the center of the floor, then to the left. But you can give it any name what you want, but actually the four quadrants, it's so clear as it clear is for
Yeah.
myself.
No, I like it. I like to work with the four quadrants. I do sometimes ton because it's the ballroom. I work a lot in the ballroom space where you typically have a long side and a short side, right? So I often make then 6 blocks, as you can see, so that the block
Yeah.
stays the same and make it. But it's the same thing. It's the same principle. It's the same principle because then you can describe the pathways for each blocks. But if it's a more elongated floor, then I tend to use 6 blocks, right? And that makes it a little bit easier. I notice for students to get that right. Otherwise, am I on the long side of the A or the long side of the B? If the floor is a little bit more square, then I typically use 4 in what I do. But yeah,
Mm.
no, I love that. I love that principle, and they use it in ballet for as long as I know, by the way. And then
Mm.
last time in the Dutch podcast, you also talked about what we call the windrows, right? North, south. Can you talk about that? I thought it was interesting too because some people use that. We go up, down,
Yes,
north,
north
north, south. Yeah,
to the north, to the east, or to the west, or to the south.
Mm-hmm.
And yes,
Yeah.
quite interesting. And then all what is in between. Eh?
It's interesting because I live in Dallas at the moment, although I'm Dutch. But typically here in Dallas, or actually in most places in the United States, when we give someone direction, we typically say, "Oh, you go north here, and then you take east there." And then as a Dutch person, when I just came to the Netherlands, to the United States, that was a foreign way of talking to things. We would not do that, and we would say, "You go straight there, and then you go right here," and we do not that. So you could use them both ways, right?
Yes,
And it's nice to get used to both ways. What I like what you said, always understand that you have to make clear, do I do it from my perspective or do I do it from the viewer perspective, which is not always only the audience. And that ties into another podcast that we made if it comes to, do you see it from the inside or do you see it from the outside
yeah.
in? And
Yes.
so that's how you can see pathways too. Is someone moving towards you in a future line, right? That gives a
Mm,
different feeling to think about it. Or am I moving towards that person in a future line? That's a different feeling of looking at a pathway. And that's why
yes.
Tom had a whole podcast about proprioception. It's always relatively in the space that you are in relationship to the things that are in the space. And that's how you
Yes,
can.
correct, Sean. And proprioception, we have 10 body parts in our method. The, of course, you have more body parts. We had a podcast about that one. But practically, you can go over the floor pathway
Yeah.
as a human being, as one
Hmm.
individual. Then you can move your lymph or your body parts in a air pathway, but in a kinosphere.
Yes.
We
Yes.
explained the kinosphere
Yeah.
from kinetic, from movement, and from sphere, from the atmosphere, the space where you are in. And also, your body parts can go to a maximum of reach and a minimum of reach. And when you move through space time, actually, we move our body, our person, our brain, and our body. And our brain we call the fifth dimension because the fifth dimension creates, as an artist, as a human being, a personality, the other four dimensions. So if you are an artist, use your 5D without rules. You create your rules by yourself on that floor pathway, air pathway, and in a kinosphere. But if you have a in the maximum reach or minimum reach, or how you want to call it, in all directions, 360 degrees, and in all levels from up to down. But if you are with a group, then each person has his own kinosphere
Yeah.
because you cannot be in the same kinosphere
Kinosphere.
on the same spot.
Yeah. Hold
You
that
you
thought,
can,
Ton. Hold
yeah,
that thought. Yes.
yeah. The kinosphere individually, you can do this also as a group, but each group has individual persons who use a different pathway on the floor, a different pathway in the air, and use the kinesphere also differently. Even when you dance symmetrically and all you dance, say, synchrone, still it will be in a different place in space. And maybe you can do the how exactly the same and what from the body parts, what and how, but how we would say it's also a different dynamic use of the muscle tone, quite interesting on the pathways. And you can stand one by one in a line behind each other, but still you have a different space. And it's one
Absolutely.
line, then it's a geometric pathway
Yeah.
already
Yeah.
from one person to the from
Other.
the first person to the last person, where you call the first person. That's a line then. And if you have a curved pathway, then it's an organic pathway. A geometric pathway, it's one line or more lines. And the organic pathway is more indirect. And each dancer could be unorganized, be on the floor. Then still you have different skin spheres. And when you would dance on a spot and would use only the air pathways, then you could be unorganized dance, or you make it organized,
Organized.
and then it's more one message. One arm in the air, all do one arm in the air, and this looks quite impressive. When I look to the Olympics, maybe you can look back from Beijing in 2000 and what was it, 8 or something like that. But in the beginning of the 20th century, that was really impressive because there are 10,000 people who did exactly in their own kinesphere exactly the same movement in the same moment. It's not exactly the same movement. It looks for the eye in the same movement, but that's really impressive. And also the marching bands who are walking in a pathway, floor pathway,
Or military.
and in the air pathway they are using their instrument for left to right. That's also quite impressive to see.
Yeah.
But it's all a little bit predictable, actually. This is why I like to watch to it, not too much, but I like more the organic way how they use the organic
It's personal.
pathways.
Yeah.
Personal, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
It's personal.
personal
Yeah.
taste. But
But
nevertheless, to tell the other one is also impressive.
oh yeah, if you try to do only with four people to do a pattern at the same time, it can never be in the same place. By the way, you have to think about
No,
that a
never.
little bit. You can never, if we, even if we're in a line tone, you would follow either. I would follow your past path, and then you can
Mhm.
go on my future path if you think about it that way. But you can never be in the same space at the same time. That's impossible. Can move at the same time though. But yeah, to see in Beijing when you see thousands of people moving more or less in the same way, yeah, that is impressive. To organize and practice that, I remember you were working with one of your teams and try to film it. Are you exactly the same foot placement? And if you look very quickly and you're not trained, you think it's all the same. But when you look closely, there's so minimal differences. And it's no,
Yeah.
yeah, it's impressive. But I am with
What?
you. I like a little bit more the surprise, the organic way, or the unexpected way. But that's personal,
Yeah.
of course. Yeah, it's very personal.
Yes. How you can use the pathways, that's
Yeah,
what I did. And in Japan, you have a sport for it, precision walking.
yeah,
That's also impressive. The universities do that. Uh,
yeah,
all geometric lines, and sometimes in the Kano, that one movement goes to another.
yeah.
Um, one person put the jacket off, then the next one start, the next one start, the next one start, the next one start. We call it decano or an domino effect. You can call it also like that. That's really wonderful. And I was so inspired that I put it in a Russian formation team for
Hmm?
that 8 persons walk through the other 8 persons. They came from a totally different direction.
No,
And then I put it in reverse
no way.
that you not could perceive it. And
Wow,
they keep the same distance. They didn't look to each other, and wow, it looks magical. I did it just for intro because for Latin
it's not
uh,
common. Yeah.
competition it's not allowed to do that, but for intro it was allowed, and that was really quite impressive. But I was inspired by the Japanese precision walking, and also what I did, how to use the space different, because this was all geometric lines, straight lines. I did now in December, I was in December in Moscow, 24, and I made a choreography for a big company there for Ballroom Latin. They tour through Russia in the theaters and in Europe. And I put the dancers in the audience with the full lighting on, because normally the dancers come on stage in the theater from the back drawer and they walk or they dance to the floor, one person or whole group. But I thought I will use a different space and I will use it also with a different lighting in the space. And because everybody, mostly, not everybody, mostly people make it darker on the theater floor, and then some one light comes or more light. And I
Yeah.
thought I do in everything the opposite.
Yeah.
I do full lightning, white light in the audience, and the dancers dance already between the chairs and move over the chairs, over the audience to the
Mhm.
stage in the
Ah,
full white lightning and come to the stage, and the lighting slowly changed. That was my idea. And use the space different in different pathways. Don't use the same pattern always. And Sean did also something with the dancers on the competition dance floor for a show in
yep.
their school in Dallas. And you told it in the Dutch podcast, Sean. You can tell it by yourself
Yeah.
what they did there.
Yeah, typically what they do is what in theater, or they come from one side and or they start waiting, and then typically in what we call formation dancing, and they hear a gong, and then they have to start. So I didn't want to do that. Of course, that's all working with Ton coming to a little bit crazy ideas. So everyone was sitting in the audience under the table, and it was about zombies, and suddenly these zombies they came crawling out their spaces and start to make weird formations. And it was like, yeah, people say, we have never ever seen something like that. That was like, they still talk about it. And they still talk about it of the surprising. And this is the thing that you have to do. Once you did it once, for us,
Yeah.
we have to come up with
You
something
use
else
the
again.
space differently,
Different.
and the audience they have to react on it in their own kinesphere to
Yes.
make an air pathway
Yeah.
or even a floor pathway to give them space where the other kinesphere
Yeah.
can move as a dancer. And I told you already, the dancer by himself in that kinesphere is the 5 dimension, and space is the 3 dimension, and time the four. But the audience is actually also
Yeah.
use the 5Ds
Yeah.
in their kinesphere and their pathways, only they are
Not
not so
aware.
conscious about it.
Well,
And
yeah.
the dancers hope they are conscious about it.
Yeah.
They
And
are more aware how to use it.
And here was the thing, Ton. In the Dutch podcast, I didn't say it, but normally you can recognize the dancers because they are different. They have different clothes. But this was a Halloween party. So everyone was in different clothes. And my dancers were just sitting in between them as zombies. And I thought, okay, that's a nice zombie costume. And then the music came on, and then they discovered, oh, it's one part of the dance group. So it was literally that effect had it too, and they had so much fun in it, and it had nothing to do with are they really good dancers or not. You can do that with
No.
any dancer. Everyone who dances is a dancer in Tons and my mind. It had nothing
Yes,
to do.
absolutely, Sean.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What I try, that's what I do. I try to stimulate, if there would be an external sensory perceiver, I would try to stimulate them. And the audience, you cannot call them, you can call them an external sensory perceiver, but it will not say that they really perceive you at that moment. Maybe they are talking about the problems from yesterday with the next one who
Yeah.
is sitting by them, or maybe they are on their phone and their attention is on their phone. But if you want to get a full attention of your external sensory perceiver in that audience, then you have to stimulate them.
You have to include
And
them. Yeah.
yeah, you have to include them and try to get an interaction. And this is also what I did with my children. We have one time a year theater, how you say, production, and we go in a theater. And what I did, normally the audience come in the pathway, they walking forward, and I put the dancers stationary as a statue on the floor or the stand where the people have to go through the two people, and it makes the space then more narrow and more exciting for them. And also they had to laugh already, but they had already a connection from, oh, this is strange, all bodies there standing or lying on the floor. And when it takes like 20 or 25 minutes that the whole audience is inside, and when I scream change, they change the position in slow motion. Everybody had a different timing, of course. But then when they reach the stop again, because 20 minutes, the same posture, that's you have to change after 2, 3 minutes, you have to change position. That was also quite interesting.
Yeah, you told me they were on
And
the stairs, they were everywhere.
they were
Yeah,
everywhere in the
that was
audience,
yeah,
on the stage, on
cool,
the
cool.
pathways.
Yeah,
They couldn't move how they wanted to move the audience. And that was actually exactly what I wanted. I wanted to make it
yeah,
interesting for them, to stimulate them. And also, not the audience, but the external perceiver had already to laugh sometimes, or, oh, can I step over you?
yeah.
But she couldn't react, so she didn't say anything. So they could
Brilliant,
wait. Or yeah, and
brilliant.
older people, of course, they make people who are not so able to walk. They make a little bit more space for them.
Of course.
But that's
Yeah,
how you can use the space on a different way. And I
yeah.
wanted to say something more. I put it on the paper, but yes, in the different styles of dance styles, like ballroom dancing, Latin dancing, standard dancing, ballet, contemporary, hip hop, ballet dance, cheerleading, they use all different the pathway, the floor pathways, the air pathways, because the style is different. So in the ballroom, we dance against the clockwise. In ballet, they try to use more the floor and the four quadrants. In formation Latin dance, they try to do this also, in show dance also. But in contemporary or hip hop, it's much more stationary. They
Yeah,
have more a use of an air pathway, and also the lymph or the body parts in the kinetic, in the kinosphere, is also different use in the isolations, and this is why it's so different. But the lines they make, they use all the same tools: straight lines, curved lines, geometric lines, organic lines, symmetric, asymmetric. And yeah, that's quite different. And the posture lines, it's also in different. But the pathway absolutely is different in each dance form, how they use the space and
okay.
how
Yeah,
timing wise. This is why you can recognize
the
also
style.
the style of it.
The
It's the
style.
same like I can recognize you, Sean, or somebody else who I know, because they have a different form, a different outline, different hair color, etc., different voice, use of voice, toning. And the same is that in the styles of using pathways and styles. Yeah.
Yeah, but the principle of pathways, so that we talked about, can be used across all dance styles. The principles of pathways, and then Ton used literally the word. It is how you use it that makes the difference. But the principle, what we talked about, the past pathway, the future pathway, the pathway you're on, floor pathway. We have. Do we need to pause? Okay.
I
Yeah.
have to work now, Sean.
Oh, you
So we
have
have
to
to
go.
make
Oh
an
my
end
God.
to
I
it.
did not notice that we already at the end of the hour. That always goes so
Yeah,
fast on. We have so
yeah,
many things to
incredible.
discuss. We said it already. The Dutch podcast. This is one of these topics that is so broad. We can keep going on it. We'll bring it back another time.
Yes,
As always, it was an enjoyable talk with you about pathways, floor pathways, air pathways, future, past, and current. Yeah, what's next on the program? You will hear and find that out if you come to our next podcast, of course. This was Ton and Jean with our Dance Gems podcast. I already say
yes.
to you, see you next time. And
See you next time.
while you are going to your class, I will tell everyone where they can find us. And
Perfect,
so
Sean.
we already say bye bye.
Bye bye, and thank you for listening if you reach the end.
Yes. All right, this was another episode of Dance Jams, where we were, where we are going, pathways in dance. And you can find us on Spotify, Dance-Jams, Apple Dance-Jams, YouTube at Ton Greten /podcast, or on our website www.jam.dance/podcast. We also have a Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/the Dance Jams. And that was it. And I'll see you next time. Bye bye.